News just in, the South African economy grew by 0.6% in the second quarter of the year. Now let's unpack these numbers with economist Dawie Roodt. Dawie, thank you so much for joining us today. Which sectors contributed to the growth in the second quarter of the year?
Good morning to you. Well, the most important sectors that contributed to the 0.6% was manufacturing. The manufacturing industry expanded at a rate of 2.2%, but because it's a relatively big sector, it contributed 0.3% to this 0.6% growth in the economy. And then two other sectors both contributed 0.1% to growth, and that's agriculture, forestry and fishing, that's the one, and mining and quarrying. I'm a little bit concerned about mining and quarrying because that's also a very important sector to the economy, and they only contributed 0.1% to overall economic growth. So the most important sector is manufacturing, and that came in as a bit of a surprise.
So which sectors did not fare that well?
The most important one, and again, that's also not a surprise, the sector that really performed quite badly and actually subtracted 0.2%. So we could have had the economic growth of 0.8% if that sector expanded at a 0% rate, and that is transport, storage and communication. They contracted at a rate of nearly 2%. So, and they subtracted then economic growth of 0.2% from overall economic growth. For the rest, they are relatively small ones, and they didn't contribute that much or subtract that much from economic growth. But the biggest single negative growth sector is certainly transport, storage and communications.
But Dawie, 0.6% growth, it is a bit more than most economists expected, but this does not mean that the consumer is feeling any lighter load at the moment.
In fact, you can look at GDP growth from the other side as well, and recently we have been doing it, looking from the expenditure side of the economy, and the household consumption expenditure of households, and that's an indication of the overall well-being of individuals in the economy, actually contracted by 0.3%. So it is very clear that despite the bit of an uptick in economic activity, that the households are still under tremendous pressure in the economy.
So we are now on stage 6 power cuts, and this will obviously have an impact on the GDP data for this quarter we're in and for the GDP data for the rest of the year.
I did mention manufacturing that did fairly well in the second quarter, better than expected, but I'm afraid the opposite is probably going to happen in the third quarter because of the high levels of load shedding that we are currently experiencing. My expectations for economic growth this year is that for the year in total, we're probably going to see between 0% and 0.5% growth. And of course, there are many reasons for that, but the lack of electricity is a very important contributing reason.
So we did see the growth in the first quarter, if I remember correctly, that's 0.4 after a big dip in the fourth quarter last year. I think that was minus 1.1. Now, are fears of a recession completely off the table for the foreseeable future? We did see now 2 consecutive months now again with growth, but that doesn't mean everything is all good and well.
Yeah, I think that's more of an academic question than anything else. It is certainly possible that the economy can dip into a recession in the third and fourth quarter, and then we are in a so-called technical recession, but it doesn't really matter. The reality is that the economy is hardly growing. 0.6% economic growth is very, very weak levels of economic growth. The population is growing at a level double that. So it's clear that even with this smallish economic growth, that we are still getting poorer and unemployment levels are likely to keep on going up. I'm afraid to say that we need to make some serious structural adjustments to the economy before we can get this economy to start growing at a decent rate. And with a decent rate, I'm talking about 3, 4, 5, 6, 7% that we need to grow the economy if we really want to make a difference to unemployment and poverty in the economy. I'm afraid that the current trajectory, whether we dip into negative growth or slight positive growth, it doesn't really matter. Unemployment and poverty will remain and will actually go up at these kind of levels.
But Dawie, realistically, do you think we can get to that 6% or even 4%?
Sure. Certainly we can get there. If we make the necessary structural adjustments, we can get there. It's not going to happen overnight. It will probably, if we really have a government that's strong and actually implement the right macroeconomic policies, we will be able to get this economic growth trajectory up to 3, 4% within a year. We can't do it overnight, but within a very short period of time, it can happen. But I'm afraid the ideology and the wrong macroeconomic policies are standing in a way of much, much stronger economic growth.
Now, just the last one, Dawie. Now, with our new BRICS partners joining us in January next year, do you think we can increase our exports enough to stimulate more economic growth?
Certainly, there is going to be a positive aspect as far as that is concerned, but mostly on the margin. I did mention that we've got some structural issues in South Africa, and it doesn't really matter who our trading partners are. Of course, it matters. It's going to help some, but we need to fix the structural issues in the South African economy. There are many countries that do want to trade with us and do want to do business with us, but as long as we don't have the railroads that don't work properly, the harbours that don't work properly, as long as we don't have electricity and that sort of problems in the economy, it doesn't matter who we do business with, we won't be able to properly benefit from that because of the structural issues in the economy.
And that's also where government policy should come in to address this, Dawie.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Exactly. Government policy needs to be changed. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dawie. That was the Chief Economist at the Efficient Group, Dawie Roodt.